Hi team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the, 19th of March 2024. It's a bit late today, everything's a bit behind. I had to do a recording with Tom and I was a bit late to it this morning. It's here, I'm here. Just a little bit of house cleaning before I go on. I was just having a chat eventually to Lawrence22, such an amazing member of the channel. And there were some issues with banning on a live stream the other night in the live chat. And I think it was a mistake of YouTube or whatever. Anyway, Lawrence, don't go. Definitely don't go. You're such a valued member of the community. But just a note on me and comments. So I don't know any other YouTuber that looks as many comments on their own channel as I do, especially without a team. Like, you are my team, but like in terms of like an employed team of people that these big YouTubers have to manage all their stuff, it's me on my own, right? And I can monitor comments quite well using the YouTube Studio platform. But if someone replies to one of my comments, it's very difficult for me to find those comments. I have to use a different thing. So the YouTube Studio defaults to unresponded to comments, and if I've liked something, it disappears off that, and if I respond to it, it disappears. And so the default platform mechanism is for new comments, and I then have to find responded to comments in a completely different way through notifications. And so basically I invariably miss when people reply to me personally, and so in this case I think Lawrence replied to me and I didn't reply back because I just hadn't seen the comment. So anyway, just reach out to me in some other way, please do. So anyway, that's by the by, but I had to say that. Right, it's a big day for news, so I might have to split this into two videos because there's been a Ramstein, and that's going on today, and as a result, there are things dripping through the news filters from Ramstein. So that's taking place. That's in Germany in person. So we've got Lloyd Austin over there. He's recently been ill, of course, so it's good to see him on his feet. USA will not allow Ukraine to lose, says the Pentagon chief. Quote, "We know that the conditions in which the Ukrainian army is fighting are extremely difficult. Unfortunately, civilians are suffering from Russian drone attacks, so our message today is pretty clear. The United States will not allow Ukraine to lose. Our coalition will not allow that, and the entire free world will not allow it," said Lloyd Austin at the meeting. As a result of the meeting, the first big news to come out in terms of military aid is a package from Germany. So Boris Pistorius has announced a new 500 million euro military aid package that includes 10,000 155mm shells from the German stocks. So that should be fairly instantaneous. 180,000 155mm shells from the Czech initiative. So fundraising for the Czech initiative there. I don't know if that's extra what they've already contributed to the Czech initiative. And then 100,000 155mm shells newly ordered in Germany. So that could be following on the back. There's also 100 armoured vehicles for infantry and 100 transport vehicles as well as the ammunition. So that's really good. Germany stepping up yet again. Now, yesterday, the Belgian government had given a green light for an additional 412 million euros of aid to Ukraine. This is really substantial for Belgium. It already gives through the EU funding. So although you don't often see bilateral stuff from many countries like Belgium, it's not that they're not providing, it's just that it goes through the EU funding. They are providing nearly 300 Iveco LMV Lynx vehicles. That looks something like this. 300 it says there. 300 Lynx vehicles. Italian-made mine-resistant armored personnel carrier that can be equipped with various weapon systems, including remote-controlled ones. So that's good news. Supply of artillery ammunition worth 373.1 million euros. The ammunition will be sourced from Defence's own stocks as well as through an international group purchase from various companies. armoured ambulances, three mine hunters in close cooperation with the Netherlands. So we know the Dutch have already, I thought they had provided two, but I don't know whether they are in the middle of providing two that are being refurbished or whatever. Maybe Belgium is getting on board with helping with the funding for that initiative. It's really good from Belgium. In fact, to the point where Jay in Kiev says, further accentuating the comparative dysfunction in the US as it's paralysed under a deluge of Russian disinformation campaigns, tiny Belgium unveils another $450 million defence package for Ukraine. There is a comparison of GDP. So Belgium's GDP has not changed effectively since 2000. Americans' GDP has gone up 2.5 times. It's a huge increase in GDP in terms of billions of dollars. The difference between the two countries is obviously fairly immense. So as a percentage of GDP, this is what is being talked about quite a lot, because although the US has given an awful lot of stuff in real terms, they are the biggest defense manufacturer, the biggest defense stockpiler, the biggest army, the most spent on defense in the world. They spend more than the next 12 countries combined. So the US spends more than number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 combined in the world on defense, and has the biggest GDP, right? So in terms of what they have the ability to provide as a percentage of GDP, the US is down at something like 0.3%, which is much smaller than virtually every other European nation, Belgium included. Right, so it's how you slice and dice the figures. Although that's not to belittle what the US has done, because it's been without the US, Ukraine would be screwed. Right, Romania, Finland. Quote, the president informed the parliament through a letter that he approved the transit of the equipment and material goods donated by Finland to Ukraine. So Romania, this is allowing transport of Finnish equipment. And there's some talk about this, including maybe quite a big vessel. President Iohannis approved the training of Ukrainian military. In Romania, it's about dozens of soldiers who will learn to use F-16 planes at the military base in Fătăști. He also gave the green light for some military transports destined for Ukraine. And indeed, here it is. So gifts for Putin. Finland decided to send 30-ton assault boats to Ukraine and asked Romania for logistical help. We'll host the training in port and place them in the Black Sea, says Romania. From then, Ukraine is given the keys and may use them how they wish. Really excellent news for Ukraine there, and shows that Finland are really, stepping up, and Romania is helping in this case. Finland don't often announce what they give. They've given a lot of stuff, but there are very few public announcements about that. So the European Union has prepared legislation that would see Ukraine start to receive profits generated by frozen Russian sovereign assets, as early as July. So there was talk about having things in place to talk about at the G7 in July? And G7 leaders were like, right, we need to have some framework in place so we can discuss it then. However, it looks like it will be enacted even before that meeting in July. So incredibly good news there. The EU just approved an additional €5 billion, $5.4 billion in flexible military aid for Ukraine. The funds will be dedicated to the new Ukraine Assistance Fund, UAF, within the EPF. The funding can be used for procurement within Europe or from operators established or with production facilities outside the EU or Norway. So I presume it's going to heavily benefit. Obviously, if it's EU money, the EU is going to want it spent within the EU or with EU operators who exist outside the EU, have like production facilities outside the EU. 14 EU countries, including France, Germany and Italy, are calling for the European Investment Bank to do more to finance Europe's defence industry in a joint letter. So, quote, the European executive wants 50% of the military equipment ordered by member states to be supplied by European industry by 2030. Today, 68% of EU arms purchases for Ukraine came from American manufacturers. So this is that whole discussion about, well, if you want the EU to step up and spend more money on defence, then they're going to want to spend that money inside the EU. So part of the EU strategy will be, new spending will have to come from, or mainly come from, entities, defence, military, industrial complex entities inside the EU, as opposed to going to the US. So the US, on the one hand, wants the EU to spend more, but on the other hand, would like them to spend money on US equipment. A good story on the Czech ammunition initiative. Maybe the most interesting thing was Petr Pavel, it's kind of ceremonial position. The Czech president. He doesn't have as much influence politically on the day-to-day running of Czechia as the prime minister and the administration, but he's doing a really good job of rallying people around support for Ukraine. But Pavel stating that European production is building up to the point where it can meet Ukraine's needs. So there's been all this talk about what the Americans can achieve and then what the Europeans can achieve, and they pledged 1 million rounds. And then there's this talk about, well, is it enough? Have they really, have they stepped up to the plate? Well, actually, the Czech initiative is showing that or is maybe motivating the European defense industry to really step up. So Czech president saying that Czechia is trying to deliver ammunition as quickly as possible, trying to deliver it to Ukraine as quickly as possible, but also that I think it's here, in the near future, European companies will be able to produce a necessary amount of ammunition to replenish stockpiles of European countries, as well as to provide Ukraine with ammunition if it needs it in the near future. So, of course, in the near future, that does a lot of heavy lifting, that term, but we'll see. But it looks like the European defence industries are definitely ramping up. Romanian president has approved, I've already said that, the transit of goods and the training of 50 Ukrainian pilots. So it's just putting a number on that. That's the extra bit I wanted from that one. So 50 Ukrainian pilots. Interesting. I wonder how many are being trained in the US and how many are being trained, I think, is it in Denmark? So that is not just happening in Romania. Now, Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been a very strong advocate for support for Ukraine, but has flip-flopped on congressional support and voted against it because he's towing the party line with regard to Trump. And my theory is that they have some compromise over Lindsey Graham, which has long been understood. Anyway, he's in Kiev at the moment, and he's come out and said some things, and one of them has been actually met quite negatively by Ukrainians. I was speaking to Greg this morning, and he's like, people are pissed off with what Senator Lindsey Graham has said. So he said Ukraine should throw people under 25 to the front lines and pass a new mobilization law as soon as possible. Now, this is a sore point in Ukraine. You've got the general public that don't want to be mobilized. You've got Zelensky that realizes it's a really difficult decision because it's going to screw the economy over, but he needs the troops on the front line and it will harm his popularity figures. And then you've got the army that's saying we frickin' need people on the front line. And you've got all of these dynamics going on, and then you got Senator Lindsey Graham coming over from the States, who has already voted against a package that could have sent aid to Ukraine previously. I don't know where he stood on the last Senate one, 70 to 29. But anyway, he's America's in an interesting position with regard to aid, coming over and then lecturing the Ukrainians about mobilizing. They need to mobilize more. Now, what he's saying may well be true. Like, maybe he may be on point completely, but it's kind of like the way you say things, where you say them, and when you say them. So anyway, he urged Ukrainians not to argue about whether the US will support them when deciding on mobilization. Quote, "You are fighting for your life, so everyone should serve, not 25 or 27 years old. We need more people. Whatever we do, we should fight. Whatever we do, you fight for yourselves." Maybe you may be correct. I wouldn't go as far as 18, but you've got a point about they need people on the front lines to fight. But I guess standing up and saying that on a podium in that kind of way probably won't go down too well with the Ukrainians. Graham also expressed hope that Ukraine will get ATACMS missiles in 2024 so we can take down the damn bridge connecting Crimea to Russia. That will be met with a lot more positivity. I hope that those eligible to serve in the Ukrainian military would join. I can't believe it's at 27. He said, you're going to fight for your life, so you should be serving not at 25 or 27. We need more people in the line. It just had somewhere else where it was basically the conversion of aid to Ukraine, this is again Lindsey Graham, into an opaque loan makes a lot of sense, and I hope it will be passed in the House of Representatives in the coming days, not weeks. I spoke with Speaker Johnson. He is trying to find a way to advance aid to Ukraine, says Lindsey Graham. So this is talking about moving some of the aid from being outright grants of aid and turning it to loans. And then, which I think, rather than nothing, that's good, that's something. There are some people that are saying, do you know what, rather than being over here lecturing us, you should be back there lecturing Mike Johnson. So, it is, yeah, it's a difficult one there. I don't know that he's done himself too many favours, and that was a diamond opportunity to do so. Le Monde, French newspapers reporting that a group of Atlantic Alliance parliamentarians and members of NATO Parliamentary Assembly are calling on European governments to supply more Scalp EG, Taurus, Mirage 2000s and Gripens to the Ukrainian army. So there's this growing swell of people, parliamentarians within Europe saying that Ukraine need the big things. Yeah. London City Hall. Britain is starting to send fast and other cars to Ukraine as aid after the Klitschko's appeal. So the mayor of Vitaly Klitschko, the former boxer and mayor of Kiev. In London, the expanded ULEZ, so that's ultra low emission zone recycling scheme. So there was all this controversy to do with, right, here, and someone didn't quite understand it yesterday in the comments how to explain. So what is this situation? So if you buy, so Transport for London is a kind of a London-based transport organisation that kind of sorts out all of London's transport because it's such a big city and so on and so forth. And they started under the Mayor Sadiq Khan this scrappage scheme, which has a dual purpose. One is to drop emissions down. So the idea is that you are swapping an older vehicle that emits more pollution, and you are incentivized to get rid of that to buy a newer car that emits less pollution. So what TfL are doing is saying, right, if you get rid of your old car, we'll give you like £2,000, for example, as part of the scrappage. So we'll pay you £2,000 to have that car scrapped, and then you will get a new car. And that is an incentive for people to replace their cars and whatever. It's like a £2,000 sweetener. Now, there was an issue at the beginning of this scheme because people were saying, well, send those cars instead of to the scrapyard, send to Ukraine. But then there was it was legally, the way it had been organised, it was legally, they were unable to do that, legally speaking. So the question then became, but well, can you change the laws? Just change that rule that you've set up there and then get into Ukraine. And the other thing was well, the idea is we're trying to get rid of this pollution, but we're taking this polluting car and then we're just moving it over to there. And so you're not actually really getting rid of the pollution. But anyway, so these arguments went on. And in the end, a lot of people blame Sadiq Khan, but actually he said, well, as long as we can change the laws, we'll do it. And then they appealed to the central government who changed the rules of the whole scheme, and then they're doing it, right? So now they're doing it. So in London, the expanded ULEZ recycling scheme now allows used vehicles to be sent to Ukraine. It was officially launched. The programme was created after the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, appealed to the mayor of the capital of Great Britain, Sadiq Khan, last year. At the end of January this year, the Transport Unit of the Greater London Administration, TfL, developed a scheme for the transfer of the cars. The London Ambulance Service was one of the first to announce its participation in the new programme. It plans to hand over 50 ambulances to Ukraine, according to London City Hall. So that's fantastic. Really good news there. I'm happy with that. Right. There's a really interesting Times video that came out last night with Brandon Mitchell. So Brandon Mitchell's a medic who's operated on the front lines. I don't know where he is at the moment. And he admitted in a post himself that the most of the information that he gave across here wasn't from his own personal experience, but was from his former commander of the 35th brigade who is operating there. And there was lots of really interesting nuggets on here. Now, I talked to you on Friday about FPV drone usage with reference to Andrew Perpetua's data sets that Daniela from Tochny has evaluated and analysed. And there's lots of great things happening with drones, and it's mainly that the Ukrainians have overtaken the Russians in terms of drone usage across all the different categories, so positions and trenches, people, vehicles, etc. And where the Ukrainians were lagging behind the Russians in hitting positions, they've now overtaken the Russians to be hitting more positions on the March statistics so far. It might change, but so far really good. And the other one is thermal imagery and night vision drones. The Russians have overtaken. No, sorry, the Ukrainians have overtaken the Russians now. That's fantastic news. That seems to be borne out by what Brendan Mitchell was saying here with regard to night vision drone usage as well. He also talks about the Ukrainians really needing drone components as they're kind of ramping up the drone usage. They need to be able to get components from abroad. He's also talking about boats in another British scenario where we are having lots of people coming over the channel. You've got migrants trying to get across the English Channel into the UK, undocumented migrants, and what happens is their boats get they get taken off the boats and then processed, and then the boats I think are just left in a field in Kent somewhere, and they've got boats and engines that could easily be sent to Ukraine, and yet the authorities are not doing it. Health and safety, this and that, lots of excuses. He talks about that. That's something I'd like to look into because that's a potential. They desperately need boats down the Dnipro River, the Ukrainians, and it would be really great if we could just ship a load of boats that have been used by migrants to get across the channel ship them over to Ukraine, even if it's some of these are like, he talks about rigid inflatable boats, but if some are like just crappy inflatable boats, but they've got an outboard motor, just take the motor off, get the motor to Ukraine. That kind of stuff is really, really useful, but fascinating video, that well worth dipping into. And going on to some Russian nuggets here. So North Korea is continuing to supply Russia with artillery ammunition. South Korean Minister of National Defense Shin Won-sik provides an updated intelligence assessment of 7,000 ammo containers. So originally, or previously, it was up to 6,700. So another 300 containers have been shipped to Russia with North Korean ammunition in. Now, it might not be the best ammunition. It might go wrong more than other manufactured ammunition, but it is still very useful for the Russians and gives them that artillery advantage over the Ukrainians. And then finally, Sky reports, Sky News, on an ongoing story of how Russia, whose constitution forbids mercenaries, interestingly, is using thousands of them to send them to their deaths in Ukraine. And although there might be just a few here and a few there, when you add them all up, there are a lot of people that the Russians are recruiting to send to Ukraine. Ganesh told Sky News that Nepali soldiers were treated as cannon fodder and that once we are sent to Ukraine, we didn't have enough food and were beaten by the Russians. Treated like dogs, Russia is recruiting thousands of Nepali men to fight in a war on Ukraine. So thousands of men, that's just Nepal. There were claims that there were between 14 and 15,000, but I don't know the provenance of that claim. But even if it's just in the low thousands, if they're getting that many from Nepal, how many are they getting from India, from Sierra Leone, from Cape Verde Islands, from Cuba, so on and so forth. You add all these together and you've then got multiple thousands of troops that they are able to throw at the front lines to gain an advantage, and the Ukrainians can't really do that. They don't have a parallel sort of answer to that kind of recruitment. They are considering recruiting from prisons at the moment, which would certainly help them out somewhat. But there you go. Anyway, let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.